Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Big Brother 26. I'm David Bloomberg, and you may be thinking there isn't much to discuss since we're talking about Kenney, who's been trying to leave the game since it began. But we will have plenty to talk about. And when I say we this week, video viewers can already see, surprise, I am excited to have a special guest co-host with me, Cory Wurtenberger from last season.
Woohoo! Yeah, it's like one former college Tennessee kid to a current college
Yes.
Tennessee kid. I mean, this is a not an upgrade, it's a side grade.
Yeah.
I will say, I think a lot of people would think why Kenney lost. What is there to talk about? I would argue he has the most reasons why he lost. So I'm excited for it.
Yes, yes. So people know we are. What happened here is we're 3 weeks into the season, and Ovi said he just missed his family too much, and he had to leave the podcast and be with them. So
Understandable.
yeah, and yeah, of course that's not actually true. He's just unavailable. I don't want people like sending messages to Ovi like, "What happened?" No, he'll be back next week. But Cory, you got a shout out from Quinn in his speech, as well as back when he first voted. So you must still be riding high.
Yeah, I will say it's kind of a double-edged sword because every time Quinn mentions me, it sends a new wave of hate towards Quinn, which trickles down to me. He's actually my biggest enemy at this point because every time Quinn mentions me, the Cory hate renews, but it's much appreciated. I saw today he was dressing up in a suit, and I was like, okay, that's very Kevin Jacobs, but people think it's Cory Wurtenberger now, which is a bit, a little bit of again, like I'm flattered, but give respect to who deserves it. It's been fun. I mean, look, America and I cheered when he mentioned AmeriCorey.
That's right. That's right. Of course, she was the better half, according to him. So,
It's not a high bar.
so other than making new enemies, thanks to him, how have you been?
I've been great. I mean, I was kind of nervous about approaching a new season, not in terms of the I'm going to be irrelevant thing. That's actually like a nice thing. It was more so, am I going to have a weird time watching the show? Am I going to be
Hmm.
able to enjoy it the same way? And the answer is yes. I'm enjoying it a ton. I think I had a very positive experience on my season, which leads to maybe less trauma going into the next
Yes.
season. So I've just been enjoying being a Big Brother fan again.
Good. Good. Now, we, of course, got to meet at the Chicago Survivor 46 RHAP event, and you had listened to our Why Cory Lost podcast, and even you were getting America into podcasts, and now she was on the slop last week.
hmm It's crazy. Like this pipeline of super fan to all these podcast shows. I feel like I've like opened the door slightly in the Big Brother lane, and Quinn and Joseph are trying to blow the door down.
Yes.
So maybe I've opened Pandora's box here, but what am I gonna do?
Yes. Now, I did want to mention, you have a very nice background there. And for anyone who didn't see the Sunday night recap, I have the Big Brother pillows.
Ooh.
These Big Brother shops where my wife shops for pillows. So,
Yeah, we just came from TJ Maxx, and I'm like, "Up, that's the mushroom from the house. That's the everything."
well,
No,
these are from Home Goods, which I believe is a sister company to TJ
yes,
Maxx. So there you
exactly.
go. Uh, Anyway, last week in my predictions, I said I did not predict that Kenney would go, but I said I would like for Kenney to be nominated because he wants to be. Check. See him not win veto or AI arena. Check. And just get him what he wants. The hell out of Big Brother. Check. All done. Yay. Um, but as we both mentioned, it might seem like there isn't much to discuss because he basically engineered a quit without actually quitting. But there is still a lot to discuss, both about other people in the house and him, because there were different aspects to his game that helped lead to this outcome. Besides, even when we cover players on the Survivor version of this podcast, when they're medevaced, we still talk about them. So, of course, we're going to talk about Kenney here. And we'll follow our usual path of comparing how Kenney played to a set of guiding rules I originally wrote 20 years ago in 2004. I was going to ask how old you were, but I don't want to know. And I have modified ever since. We'll analyze his actions using what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and other information. And of course, the most recent version of the rules is at robhasawebsite.com/bigbrotherrules. Now, we usually have some other things to discuss about the week in general, and that is certainly true this week. In fact, there's no way we can discuss everything from this week without turning it into a very long podcast. But let's start with an insightful tweet that I saw earlier this week, which said, if Quinn is backdoored here, his power will become his greatest campaigning tool. He can declare his targets and back that up with a guaranteed HOH. And it was a great prediction because Quinn ended up doing that in his speech. So what do you think of that tweet?
I mean, a wordsmith, truly. I think what's so interesting about Quinn having to use this power, I don't even want to give him that much credit for coming up with the idea because it was forced upon him. If Tucker did not
Right.
out the power to everyone, Quinn might be lying about it to this day, despite everyone knowing it. Once it's publicly outed, at that point, Quinn first went with, I'm not going to use it at all, which is ridiculous. And then
Mhm.
he correctly pivoted to, I'm going to use it to protect all my allies and target these people. So he got to the correct destination, but the path there was not super straightforward.
I mean, I have seen that. I especially this season. I'm sure I've seen it on previous seasons, probably on your season, um, where the first, because it's such a long period to get from making the first shot at the decision to actually doing it, they can eventually get there. Like even when Tucker and Kenney were first talking to Cedric about their plan, they were like, "Well, we're not going to say anything until the very last minute. And then after AI Arena, we're going to blow up Quinn's game and get everybody to shift at the last minute," which of course is an idiotic idea because people just don't do that. But then eventually, as things moved along, I mean, aside from everything else that happened, he decided to blow up the game sooner and realized, oh no, I can't wait till the last minute. So I feel like I see a lot of that where people just kind of eventually get their way to what they should do.
Yeah, what's dangerous is a lot of times you eventually get there and then there's more time before the
Yeah.
eviction and you get off of that plan. So again, this one, like once the power's out there, the power's out there. There's not much to do anymore. And again, like I don't care how we got there. Quinn played it correctly. He
Hmm.
stayed almost unanimously against somebody that everyone knows wants to quit. He had a very easy campaign to run, but he ran it effectively.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we say it's an easy campaign to run. I still think Tucker would have gone if Quinn had won the AI Arena. So,
Oh, 100%.
yeah. Um, so definitely, just because Kenney wanted to quit doesn't mean they were definitely doing it. Um, I also don't think Quinn necessarily had to rely on that threat slash promise because he handled the situation better than I expected. And more importantly, everyone else reacted better than I expected. But it was kind of a good cherry on top.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that because I think people always talked about it's such a great idea to be able to get out Quinn now before he can use his power.
Hmm.
When the power is not that big of a threat, when it only has one more week when it can be used, and there's so many clear targets for him. It's almost like the perfect deal. We keep Quinn for 1 week. He's going to target Tucker or whoever's left on that other
Hmm.
side, and then we can all target Quinn. I think it's one of those situations, maybe the same as the BB AI arena, where like without the power, there's a lot more freedom to have conversations because the last thing you want to do is flirt with the idea of targeting Quinn,
Hmm.
that not end up playing out, and all of a sudden he's the next HOH.
Okay. So you think they're going to turn on him after this coming week here?
I think the conversation is going to happen. I don't know if we'll land there, but you're not going to be talking about that when you know he's the next HOH.
Yeah, true. Well, some will. Some do. As a matter,
Well, we'll see what they do this week.
Mackenzie, Angela, they're used to doing that. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, I think we need to talk about Tucker a bit because how can we not? I don't want to say too much about him because I think he's going to flame out soon anyway and become a main topic on this podcast. But there are just some things he said that I feel I need to call out. To start, let me just say he is playing a terrible game. Entertaining? Sure. I totally understand why a lot of viewers like him, but not good. And I mean, this will surprise you, I'm sure, but some people on social media are having trouble understanding this. That when I say he's playing a poor strategic game, they're like, you don't like fun. Like, I didn't say anything about fun. I said about strategic game. It's like if I said, I like apples, and they're like, you don't like grapes. I didn't say anything about grapes, you know? Um, but and normally social media is so calm and nobody ever misunderstands
Of
anything or
course.
jumps to a conclusion. Um, but yeah, he's not good. And I want to explain a few reasons why, and feel free to jump in and add to it at any point. First and most importantly, Tucker has a huge ego. And it doesn't only manifest itself in believing he can win every comp, but also in believing he knows everything that is going on in the house. We saw it last week when he insisted to Lisa that she had the secret power, and he knew because of his years of body language training, including from the CIA. And he was wrong. Uh, then this week, he tried using that same body language stuff on Cedric, saying Cedric couldn't look him in the eyes, which proved he felt guilty about not telling him in advance. When Cedric was like, no, I don't feel guilty because I did tell you.
It's exactly. And I think like it's not just an ego in terms of he thinks so highly of himself. He thinks very lowly of everybody else. And it's something
Yes.
I observed a lot with Cameron on my season where you know how hard you're playing. And the assumption is everyone else is not
Mhm.
playing at all. That's what he called out to Izzy and Felicia during his nomination speech. As someone who watched the entire season from, outside the house,
Yeah.
Izzy and Felicia were playing very hard.
Oh, hell yeah.
But you get so caught up in your own game, and because you're doing so much and your back's always against the wall, even though you're the one who put it against the wall, you think lower of everybody else. And I feel like that's what we're observing with Tucker. It's like you're not the only one playing, you're just the one playing the worst.
Yeah. And I think that's it's a problem we have talked about on, I think more usually on Survivor, but on Big Brother too, where people are like, nobody is strategizing. No, they are strategizing. They're just not strategizing with you. And that means you need to do something about it. Um,
But David, they are strategizing with him. Like he just doesn't care.
right, right. Um, it goes beyond that too. I think he kept saying that he made the move for Cedric, and that all Cedric had to do was say he was nominating Quinn because he hadn't talked much game with him, which Tucker insisted was the case because, like you just said, no one else is playing. He didn't know, nor did he consider, that the two of them might actually be talking game. They're in the Pentagon together. They have a separate Final Two deal. I mean, Quinn has a Final Two deal with everyone, but uh, so yeah, they've talked game quite a bit. It would have looked very strange if Cedric had gotten up there and said, I'm nominating you because we haven't talked game. Quinn would have been like, what are you talking about? But Tucker didn't know that. And in his mind, he can't possibly be wrong.
And look, who knows? Maybe he's right.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 weeks from now, we'll be talking about why Tucker won Big Brother 26.
Oof. I mean, there's going to be a lot of I told you so's aimed in my direction if that's the case, but I don't think so. Then again, I did pre-write a Why Jag Lost podcast, and never got to use it, obviously. So
Look, we don't know what this next twist is. If it's another version of the BBAI arena, you could lock him into the final 7.
yeah, that's true. Of course, Tucker's biggest problem is he gets bored easily. He even admitted it in a diary room. He's 3 weeks into a 3-month game, and he's already antsy. So he wants chaos, but he calls it playing hard. He even told Joseph on the feeds, this shit was too boring. I'm not afraid to play this game. Everyone else seems like they're effing, he didn't say that, afraid to play this game. I'm here to play some Big Brother and make some Big Brother moves. And he's definitely making Big Brother moves. They're just not good Big Brother moves.
No, but it's so interesting because I think we're operating under the lens of how we've always watched Big Brother. It's really bad to not use the veto on yourself, to nominate yourself to be a pawn. And
Right.
these are bad things. I think every one of his decisions was bad.
Mm-hmm.
But he does have a relatively reliable security blanket, and he's making use of it. And it's like, I can look at every one of his decisions, say they're bad, and fully expect him to survive the week. And I think he has so much confidence, and some of that confidence is well founded in his comp ability, where the ego is going to keep growing and growing until eventually that bubble gets popped.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that, well, the comps have been more equitable, at least in the beginning, but with 2 comps to get out of, it's likely that there is something in his wheelhouse, either veto or AI arena.
Well, you play a comp against 14 people. Okay, that's hard
Yeah,
to win. Then you
right.
go against 6. It's more
Mhm.
doable. Then against 3. And I think what a lot of
Yeah.
people like lose sight of, it's not always about is the comp equitable or inequitable. That's a huge part of it, but that's just
Mhm.
one part of it. The other part of it, are you good at comps? And that is like these carnival games, these silly.
Right.
Cameron was really good at them. Tucker seems to be really good at them. And ultimately, it's kind of hard to design a comp that isn't in a booth with a true or false, that someone like Angela has a better chance of beating
Yeah.
someone like Tucker. So like I'm not gonna say it's all comp design. This season's been a lot better than most thus far. He just seems to be good at things.
Yeah, and he did, like, in the AI arena, he did find a way to, make it easier for himself. He saw where the air was blowing out of and partially blocked it, which made it easy. Now, anyone could have done that, but he thought of it.
Mhm.
It's just I I wanna say the run can't go on forever, but then I look at your season, and he's just whenever you see someone get that overconfident, well, I'm going to say overconfident. He would say confident. Um, you feel like there has to be a point where it doesn't work.
Well, if the backdoor is available, it'll be used.
Yeah.
If it's not available,
Right.
you gotta beat him.
Right. Right. Um, compared to Tucker, there are a few other players in the house who realize, no, you're not supposed to be out front at this point. Like Chelsea was noting to Mackenzie, it's a long game. Playing it safe in the beginning is smart. And so you have other players who are like looking at him and going, this is crazy. What is he doing here? But he's just going to keep doing what he's doing.
Yes, and I think we might have reached the point of it's getting a little bit annoying, and we're not near the end of the ride.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping we reach such an extreme point where it like loops back to being awesome again. And I'm waiting excitedly.
All right. Is there anything or anyone else you want to discuss about other players or this week before we get to our regular segment?
Sure. The last person I want to talk about is Cedric,
Okay.
because he had a very messy HOH reign,
Mm,
but I feel like he was not the main reason there was a mess. Like I think he handled things as well as he could have for as good of a player as he is. I think Dan might have been able to do it a little bit more
mm.
gracefully. But I think Cedric ultimately made the right choice between targeting Quinn and Tucker. He informed Tucker. I think he has some people targeting him, but that seemed pretty unavoidable. I don't I'm not in love with the position he's in, but given the circumstances, I'm pretty happy with how he did.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And a lot of people were commenting like, he's pretty young and he handled himself very well in the face of like Tucker screaming at him, but he's also a former Marine. He's probably used to drill sergeants screaming at him and not reacting. So, uh,
Tucker's no drill sergeant.
yeah. um, so yeah, I think Cedric is in a decent position, I think.
Yeah, I will say all of his allies seem to want to go to bat for him. Like
Right.
there's been active conversations of we need to protect Cedric. And that's you don't get a lot of goodwill in Big Brother.
Yeah,
So
I just before we started recording, I posted a TikTok about the argument where Tucker was yelling at him, "You're all alone, and I'm coming after you." And it's like, no, he's not alone. He has allies.
a lot of them.
Yeah. All right. Well, it is time to move to the Julie Chen Moonves is wrong about blank segment. And you don't have to participate here in this part in case you want to, a call back for a returnee season. But
Watching.
pardon?
I'm sure Julie's watching.
Yeah, yeah. Ovi always jokes that she is, but yeah, I don't think so. Uh, typically, Julie would say something in her Entertainment Weekly interview for us to discuss here, but not this week. Other times she'll say something in her post-eviction interview of the player. But as of the moment that we're recording, the long version, I do not believe had made it to Instagram yet. So I couldn't milk that for anything. But there were two things she said on the show itself. The first was her opening of Thursday's show, where she said, Cedric blindsided Tucker. No, he didn't. In fact, shortly after she said it, we got flashbacks proving Cedric tried to put a stop to it, but Tucker refused to listen.
I think it was a blindside. It
I think
shouldn't have been, but it was.
Well, I think Tucker was blindsided.
Yes.
But he did it to himself. Don't blame Cedric for it.
Exactly.
On a similar note, Julie said Tucker made, quote, a risky move by using the veto on Angela instead of himself. And you already mentioned this. To my mind, no, he made a stupid move. The kind of move that would have earned him a smack with note cards like she gave to Marcellus way back when, if Tucker hadn't then won the AI arena. So I know she could be saying it's a risky move because now he has to win the AI arena. It's still a stupid move. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's risky, I think, is a fair word. If the edit wasn't so positive on Tucker, maybe I'd be more willing to accept a more friendly interpretation. But yeah, that's not the word I would have used.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we move on to the rules, I do want to mention that the Survivor version of the rules comes in a colorful version in poster form. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster and click on it, and then order it, and it will be sent to you. In addition to the poster, there is the poster on a t-shirt and the checklist on a t-shirt. The checklist is the closest to the Big Brother version of these rules. We haven't managed to get a merch with the Big Brother version yet. We're still working on it, I promise.
Can't wait.
So, with that, I have there we go. My screen's all moved around when I did that. As I said earlier, it may seem like we wouldn't have much to discuss about Kenney because he essentially quit without quitting. But we still need to dig into not just all of what he did, but why he did it and how it affected different aspects of his game. Plus, he didn't always want to quit, while he did always make some mistakes in the way he was playing. Let's dive in and find out not just one thing he did wrong, but all the things he did wrong. And maybe if he did anything right. At RHAP, we know reality TV, and we know why Kenney lost. The first and most important rule is to scheme and plot. And Kenney did basically none of this. He would say things like, I came to play, but he didn't. His idea of playing was trying to win comps, which is not the real game of Big Brother, at least in theory. Of course, your season, did everything possible to try to prove that wrong.
I will say there's kind of two parallel conversations we could have here, David. It's why did Kenney lose, and why couldn't Kenney lose earlier? Because it seemed like he was trying for a while. Most of his scheming and plotting was in order to remove himself from the house, and it was relatively unsuccessful. Like, he got there eventually, but I do think he was actively having strategic conversations a lot more than you would expect someone who, for a period no longer than 2 hours, at every point in his game, wanted to quit at some point. But I feel like he had strategic chats.
He did, but he told Sharon Tharp it was hard to scheme when she asked him to compare it to being an undercover cop, because he said for that he was doing it for a bigger cause. It was hard to scheme for himself, and mentioned something that we'd seen in the house also about it going against his character, which of course is why I'm wearing the honesty, loyalty, integrity shirt. It brings us to the question that everybody is asking about Kenney, but not in the way that we thought to get there, which is, why did he go on Big Brother in the first place? Because even aside from the whole thing of wanting to quit, which we'll get to, of course, how can you be a fan of Big Brother and have applied multiple years to go on, but not want to scheme? And then meanwhile, we have people like Chelsea and Brooklyn and Quinn who on the live feeds are reveling in the fact that they can put aside their real world inhibitions against lying because they know it's expected here.
Yeah, I'm of two minds. I wonder, first of all, is he being genuine or is it a defense mechanism or is it both? Because I think Kenny had a clear vision. We'll talk about that in a future role.
Mm-hmm.
Had a very clear vision of how his game was going to go. And when that kind of went off the rails, it felt like he was very deflated. And I think
Yes.
that's when you start to hear a lot more about his family and a lot more about, those integrity, honesty, loyalty, like that kind of side of things. So I'm not fully doubting that he had trouble doing these things. I also think once he realized the game wasn't for him, he started having a few more moral reservations about it all.
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, you said we'll talk about it in the future. I actually have it here because,
Mm.
Kenny told Mike Bloom that he did come in with a strategy. He wanted to align with somebody he thought would be a good social player who would also do well in comps. And he picked Matt, which didn't go so well. But instead of dusting himself off and realizing there could still be a lot of game to play, he got upset that he had to start from scratch. And I think that's, like you said, that's where he basically decided not to bother anymore. Um, you know, he just kind of tanked himself at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's had bursts of being back into it, winning the
Mm-hmm.
veto competition. He seemed more engaged, and he kind of tried to replace Matt a couple of different times with Tucker, with Cedric, but it never really stuck for him. I do wonder if there was a way for potentially him and Tucker to stay this week, if he could have gotten a little bit more engaged. If he won an HOH, does that rejuvenate his game? That's a luxury that no one should have. You shouldn't need to win a
Right.
competition to get back in the game. But I think he did come in with a plan, and it's not a horrible plan. But once the plan goes wrong, you got to be able to adapt.
Right. And like you said, he would go through these ups and downs. And that I have planned to talk about a little later, but like after Matt left, people would approach him and he'd say, I just want to be a lone wolf. And of course, what he really meant is I want to be a gone wolf. Uh, the difference a letter makes. And so he wouldn't talk game to people except when he occasionally would, like you said. And even when Matt was still there, he put so much into it that he didn't make as good relationships with others and even actively annoyed them with his pro Matt stance. Then, of course, after Chelsea won HOH, he just kind of parked himself on the couch and didn't really interact with anyone. And then that continued. And Angela would approach him and he'd talk to her, but refused to make any strategic promises. And, you know, it wasn't uncommon to see him on the live feeds just sitting alone.
No, it would be like live feed repellent. Like you see Kenny on a camera and you'd have to go somewhere else because
Yes.
there's no strategy happening there. It's very frustrating. And it felt like after Matt left, he almost had like a comfortable landing spot. Like not in the
Mm-hmm.
majority, but he kind of like Mackenzie was there and Leah, Angela's on the outs. And he would just be in the minority group and fight for as long as he could. But he actively kind of pushed a lot of these people away, trying to find the next strong social guy to work with.
Right.
It's just not good.
Right. And that's when Tucker came along, who, like you mentioned, seemed to energize him a little bit for a little while, probably because Tucker emphasized doing things that brought more excitement, and winning comps. And, uh, you know, uh, earlier this week, Kenny even sort of formed an alliance with Tucker and Cedric, and we saw how that worked. And he claimed at one point to want to work with Quinn as part of that group too. But again, we saw how that ended up. And to me, the main thing is that all of these emphasized comps rather than strategy. He only wanted to be involved if it meant he could be on top. And as soon as things didn't go 100% his way, well, then he was back in his usual, moping Kenny mode.
Yeah, look, I think if he felt like he had a path forward and a chance to win the game, there was that weird Visionaries plus Rabina and Tucker
Mm-hmm.
group that was gonna form that obviously never formed. They were talking about bringing him in. If he was in a majority alliance, does he feel like I have a shot now? Maybe we can play this game. I don't know. I still think we probably end up around here, maybe a couple weeks later. But I think the comps thing is really interesting because when I saw Kenney initially, I didn't think he would be a big competitor guy, but he's in pretty good shape. Like he could have been one of the guys to run the table if he was able to put this group together. And it's the right lesson to take away from BB25. Align with the comp people, win the game.
Yeah,
But again, when that's not initially happening, you've got to move on to the next thing. And he had no interest.
right. Another problem here is that his reads on kind of the lay of the house, they weren't as bad as Tucker's, but they weren't great either. In his interviews, he was still insisting there's a strong women's alliance and Brooklyn is running the house. I'll have more thoughts on that in the second rule, but for now, suffice it to say, no. He also said he's pretty sure Quinn won't use the deepfake HOH power, even after, as we discussed, Quinn literally promised to do so when he was on the block. Now, I typed up these notes before anything would or wouldn't happen. You know, we do this spoiler free for anything that happens after, but let me just say it would be extremely surprising to me if Quinn doesn't use it. And yet, Kenney's walking out of there going, oh, I don't think he will.
Yeah, I think maybe that is a result of him being an undercover cop where he trusts his reads so much that he doesn't feel the need to gather information.
Mm.
And if he wanted information, how is he going to get it? Like, I really
Right.
don't think he has like a mole on the other side. So
Yeah.
we have three problems. One, he thinks his reads are good. They're not. Two, he doesn't want to gather information. And three, if he wanted to gather information, he couldn't. So nothing good in this whole conversation for Kenney.
He needed to plant bugs in the house, you know.
Oh, that would
Listen
oh, they did that in Big Brother Canada. Someone could watch the live feeds. Remember that? Like, if you had Kenney in front of the 8 monitors, that's a powerful player.
Now, before we leave this rule, I do want to say that in a way, it was good that Kenney didn't really tightly align with anyone because that way other people weren't negatively affected by him leaving the way we've seen happen with people who quit on Survivor sometimes.
You know, I 100% agree.
So we can move to the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Kenney obviously did not scheme and plot too much. But one area where he failed was in keeping what little he discussed secret in terms of like his belief that there was a women's alliance. He used his supposed cop skills of being, quote, pretty observant to detect this, which you just mentioned it. First thing about this, it is so cliche to immediately blame a women's alliance. And if you were going to pick one person out of the whole cast pregame who was the most likely to say there's a women's alliance, you would have pointed right at Kenney. And I recognize that I fall into that very similar demographic. But he followed the cliche completely. And then, of course, more importantly than that, it wasn't real. Yes, the women had talked about having each other's back and the like, but they're spread over multiple independent alliances, and there is no actual women's alliance in the way that he believes. But the worst part is he told a couple guys Brooklyn was running it, and then Chemo immediately told T-Core, and then T-Core told Rubina, and then all the women knew, and they were not happy about it. Ended up confronting him in the aftermath of the veto meetings. And when they were discussing who to vote out, Mackenzie emphasized to other women how Kenney had repeatedly said he wanted to take out the women because of this supposed alliance. So I don't know why he thought it was a good idea to talk to just I guess it was any male who would listen about this.
Yeah, my thought is maybe he was using this as his device to try to make the all boys alliance, but his unfounded paranoia about the women grouping together and
Mhm.
targeting him caused the women to group together and target him. Which it happens a lot in Big Brother of
Yeah.
like it's almost like Joseph pretending like the collective is real and eventually it is real, like just talking things into existence. Obviously, to this day, there's no formalized women's alliance, but
Mhm.
I do think he kind of brought them all together because of them having a common enemy being him.
Yeah. And like I said, he just, well, like you said, it was a bad read and not gathering information. But again, even in his exit interviews, he still believes it. right now, he still believes it.
He'll watch the feeds and believe it a week from now.
Well, I don't know how he's going to watch the feeds, but
Sure.
um, all right, we can go to the third rule, which talks about the need to be flexible. I'm going to toss this one to you, even though it's kind of a gimme. How do you think Kenney did in terms of being flexible?
On a scale of 1 to 10,
Sure.
go 0.
Yeah.
There was nothing. So let's talk about the different layers of inflexibility. Number 1, he came in with a exact plan of how to play the game. He wants to play like
Mhm.
Derek Levasseur, build out his boys alliance, steamroll to the end. He as clear as like also being the undercover cop and wanting to keep it a secret. I guess the one part he was flexible on was at a certain point he decided not to keep it a secret, but that was
Ah,
not an
yeah. Yeah.
adaptation. That was him folding.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's 0 out of 10 F's all around.
Are there other ways? You said there were a number of ways that he.
Well, I think a lot of it just came down to relationships. Like he had no desire to build relationships outside of his
Mhm.
small group of people. His idea of who he wanted to work with, regardless of whether they wanted to work with him. He never reacted to the people's like the conversations he would have with other people. Him and Angela clicked really well, but he was so set in his beliefs from week 1 that Angela's insane, I can't work with her, that it never got to grow into anything real. Meanwhile, his relationship with like even like to the end of time, he still thought Cedric had his back. Even
Yeah.
though Cedric was the one who nominated him. And when I say had his back, he thought Cedric would like help evict him was the goal.
Yeah.
But Cedric did not want that at all. So like he had his idea of who he wanted to work with, never was willing to be flexible and adapt from that. And I think there was like not many options, but maybe 1 or 2 people who would have been open to pulling him in.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. It's pretty clear he was not at all flexible. I guess you could say his moods were flexible and that they rose and sank like the tides, but mostly they were underwater. And once he got it into his head that he wanted out, that stayed with him most of the time. I did think it was interesting. In one of his interviews, he talked about Cameron and said, he that was one of his favorite players, and he got a bad rap last season.
Mhm.
And there's definitely some things that remind me of Cameron, and inflexibility is certainly one of them.
Yeah, it's a specific kind of inflexibility
Right.
too. It's inflexibility because you know best.
Hmm.
When the truth is, someone like Kenny, someone like Cameron, was in desperate need of asking questions. Because there's some people who would have answered them. Like, it was so aggravating watching Quinn, Chemo, and T Core talk about we should pull in Kenny. He's a loose number. And then Kenny doing everything in his ability to ensure that doesn't happen. Sometimes you don't even have to do anything. You just have to not be self destructive. But Kenny, Cameron, they just don't have that in them.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, the fourth rule says players should not let their emotions control them. And this is, of course, a biggie because his emotional state completely overshadowed everything else about his game. And indeed, a lot of the actions that we discussed in the first rule about him avoiding talking strategy to people and the like can be traced back to this rule. He simply could not get over missing his family. Um, it turns out his emotional roller coaster started even earlier than we knew, as he said in an interview that he was upset when initially leaving to come on the show. Like his daughter was basically like, "No, I don't want you to go." Uh, Maybe his emotions at that point should have been a hint, but then he did okay the first week, probably because of bonding with Matt. And we saw how close he became to Matt so quickly, to the point that he wanted to sacrifice his game for Matt. As Quinn said at that moment, he had known Matt for 1 week. And I do think now the picture becomes a little clearer. Putting on my amateur psychologist hat, not the 10 years of study or however long that, Tucker has done. But I think he was basically leaning on Matt as a surrogate son, like an emotional crutch. And then the house kicked that crutch out from under him.
But yeah, look, it took Cameron 1 week to liken Riley to his daughter. Like maybe that's just having kids opens that possibility. I
Mhm.
could never really understand it. I do want to remind you, David. I don't know if you remember this. Do you remember the one kind of person Kenny did not want to work with going into the house? His
One
pregame
kind of
press.
person. Oh, I meant to look up the pregame and I didn't. I forgot
So
to do that.
I've got you covered. Don't worry.
Okay.
Kenny said, I don't want to work with the emotional players.
Oh, no, I thought he said he did want to work with the emotion. No,
No, he
Quinn.
did not.
Quinn
Quinn
wants to
wants
work with
to.
the emotional
Kenny
players.
wants to get the emotional players out of the
That's
house
right.
because they're
That's right.
unpredictable. And
Mm.
he succeeded.
Yeah.
It's just it is so like funny because I think the one thing I do appreciate about Kenny is I do think he's been pretty self-aware leaving the game
Hmm.
in the sense of he's saying I didn't expect it to be this hard. I thought
Yeah.
I could handle it. I could not handle it, and I think that's the truth. Like as someone who's been in there, it is very very difficult, and I was probably in a
Hmm.
better position than Kenny the entirety of the game. So I can understand how difficult it is. What surprises me is he's been a fan for a good amount of time. He's applied for so many
Hmm.
years. It must be just like the way in which he left his kids must have been nagging at him. It's hard to get into his head, but I don't doubt his intentions.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting back to after Matt left, that's when the spiral really started to show. He asked Chelsea to put him on the block. He told players he wouldn't try for veto. Then when the comp came along, he just couldn't help himself. He rode that emotional high for a day or so before going back to normal. And then by the time Cedric became HOH, he volunteered for the block again. And then he talked about winning veto and not using it on himself. But then when he and Tucker started working together, he felt a bit better. So we talked about this earlier. When things were going his way, he was okay. When they weren't, he was moaning and groaning about wanting to go home. And it was bad enough that, of course, the other players saw this, heard this, and discussed it, such as one time in an HOH room gathering where Brooklyn noted they all miss their families and it's disrespectful to people who applied to be on the show and didn't make it. Brooklyn was the voice of the people in that moment.
Absolutely. And I honestly do think it speaks a lot to your point that he only viewed the game as competitions because I think in his head, he wasn't throwing in the towel. He wasn't quitting because he tried his hardest in the veto. He tried his
Mhm.
hardest in the AI arena. He was not trying in the 24 hours surrounding all of these competitions. But to him, that's like its own category. As long as he's
Mhm.
trying in the competitions, he's trying in Big Brother, he's not quitting.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, look, I think Brooklyn really does identify with the idea of being a married mother, right? And I think
Mhm.
her and Kenny even connected based on that. So I think Brooklyn probably felt a type of way more than just about anybody else because she truly does get it.
Right.
Where how could Cedric relate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I want to close out this rule by mentioning one thing here. I am patiently waiting to get the apology that I am owed from all those people on Twitter and TikTok, YouTube, etc., who insisted that Kenny was pretending to want to go as part of his master plan. And I mean, if someone just thought that, that's fine. But the people who argued with me and in some cases got really nasty about it, I'm waiting. You could send your apologies this way.
Well, are you asking for an apology from Felicia? Because she was a massive advocate of this idea. And I responded like, "Why is he faking it in the
Mhm.
diary room?" And I say this is the biggest Felicia Cannon stan out there.
Yes.
Reads were not always like her biggest strong suit, and this I feel like falls into that category of like maybe a little bit misguided.
I did respond to one of her tweets yesterday, where she said that, and my response was just a GIF saying, "Oh, stop it already." So, I mean, if you were still saying that yesterday, come on. All right, well, we could go to the fifth rule, which says players need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. I would say Kenny was mostly fine in this area. Nobody actively disliked him in the same way that some have with Lisa, Matt, Angela, and now Tucker. Um, in fact, I think one reason that people were so willing to vote him out was they felt a bit bad about keeping him because they knew his true feelings.
Yeah, he was a very likable dude. I think there was a lot of issues with him forming like deep, meaningful relationships. But that's not really what this rule is always about. Like, he
Right.
was a very amicable person. If anyone in the house truly had a problem with him beyond the strategic stuff, he would have been immediately sent out the second he requested it. I
Hmm.
think it's almost like a testament to his, I don't want to get ahead of myself, his average social game that he went out when he did.
Yeah. Now, with that said, I will say he did a few things that you shouldn't do, such as getting angry when people were up late talking one night last week after the have-nots ended. So, of course, they're going to, I mean, people are up, they're up late all
Yeah.
the time, but especially after the have-nots end. You have to expect late nights coming into Big Brother, kind of like you have to expect scheming and you have to expect not being able to see your family. And becoming the grumpy old man yelling at kids to get off your lawn is not going to help you in the game.
Yeah, just look at the difference between him and Angela. Angela came into the game actively saying, I'm going to stay up late and hang
Mhm.
out with the kids. Kenny had the opposite plan. One is still here, one is not. I don't know if
Right,
it's that simple, but
right,
it's
right.
something.
Yeah. All right. Well, the sixth rule warns against being too much of a threat. And despite the fact that Kenny kept saying he wanted to leave, we also saw that he was on this roller coaster when it came to challenges. And, as we've discussed, he often wanted to do well there.
Yeah.
Do you think that or any other aspects of his game made him a threat?
I think his run on Big Brother 26 almost single-handedly proved the importance of this rule. In the moments where he wanted to play the game, all of a sudden he's a comp threat who's targeting the women. He's a massive threat, and everyone wanted to send him home. And the moment he started giving up and he doesn't want to win comps, he's throwing things, everybody wants to keep him around. So in this way, his greatest weakness was his biggest strength. Like the fact that he wanted to quit lowered his threat level to such a degree that people who knew Kenny was targeting them were considering keeping him.
Yeah.
But ultimately, as far as Kenny, the player who wanted to win the game, I think he had horrible threat management. He was a physical competitor. He got second in almost every competition he
Hmm.
didn't win, and everyone knew who his targets were.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you said it better than I was going to, but um, he was a threat in the house, but it was offset because people knew he didn't want to be in the house.
Yeah.
So it could go either way. I think the big question here, and I was asked this several times last night, why did the rest of the players agree to evict Kenny instead of Quinn, who is clearly a bigger threat? And despite Kenny's answer to Sharon Tharp about, oh, it's because I did so well in comps, that wasn't it. Um, there were a couple things at play here. Most importantly, as Quinn said at the end of Wednesday night's episode, he's protected by having a lot of alliances, as we discussed earlier, at least for now. Um, and sure, he was called out for it, but most of his allies still stuck by him, again, at least for now. Another factor that I see is most of the players had agreed not to vote out America's Choice because, in theory, it could have been any of them. Now, I can't remember for sure, but I suspect Quinn and a few others played a role in pushing this narrative. And, presuming he did, good for him in doing so. Um, but I also think part of it goes back to the House agreeing not to target Cedric and Chelsea the first week when they were made into mascots because the people in the House said, oh, that's not fair. And similar arguments were made this week because they said any one of them could be America's vote. So it was only fair not to evict that person.
Yeah, I agree. This doesn't apply as much to the upgrades and downgrades at the start, or it's just the downgrades. But I do think a lot of that conversation this week came from a place of fear. And despite what Tucker may say, I don't think fear is a bad emotion. It's a very real emotion in the Big Brother house. Any of them could have gone up there. And in the event that they did get nominated, they wanted to make sure that kind of
Right.
rhetoric was floating around the house. And the last thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to threat management is it may seem like perplexing based on your rules. Quinn's the bigger threat, but he stayed at certain stages of the game, being a bigger threat is good if you're on the block.
Hmm.
Chad kept me around because my supposed threat level compared to the house guests around me. So, yes, it becomes a problem when you eventually get targeted. But right now, Quinn is a shield for a lot of people in the house. Eventually, I'm sure we'll talk about why Quinn's threat management was not good.
Hmm.
But today, here and now, it was all right.
Yeah, and this gets back to, again, not this isn't why Tucker lost, but his whole attitude of you have to take out the biggest threats right away. No, you don't. Because then you become the biggest threat. And so, yeah, I mean that's a, very good point that sometimes you want to keep them in.
Mhm.
We can move to the seventh rule, which says to trust almost nobody. I think Kenney probably did pretty well here because, as we discussed back in the first rule, he didn't strategize with anybody and pretty much held himself apart from them all. Um, of course, he did end up getting in good with Tucker, but even so, he knew Tucker's foibles and talked in interviews about how he couldn't change Tucker's mind once it was made up about something. Um, I mean, there was the part where he did talk to the guys. We talked about that in the second rule about the women, the alleged women's alliance. Um, so certainly he shouldn't have trusted them. But in general, I really don't think we can ascribe most of his downfall to being overly trusting.
I'll give him a demerit for week one. Um, he was going to fall on a sword for Matt, and Matt was
Yes.
actively campaigning against him. So I think that shows like if he was playing as hard as he could, this would have been a problem.
Yeah.
It just so happens the circumstances of the season, we never really got to fully expose this weakness of his.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it's about time to wrap things up, unless you have anything that we missed in the rules. Uh, otherwise, what are your final thoughts about Kenney?
Look, as a player, I want to be empathetic, and as a fan, I want to be so unempathetic. I think he was a waste of a spot. I wish him and his family nothing but the best, and I hope casting does better in the future.
Anything else, or that sums it up?
That's all I got.
Okay. All right. Well, when I used to run my reality news online website, I also had a couple of offshoot websites. One of them was the Reality TV Hall of Shame. It featured shows, players, and moments that deserved recognition for being truly terrible. And let me tell you, if I still ran that website, I would be inducting Kenney right now. Alas, we can only do it in spirit. Kenney never should have been on Big Brother. I understand missing your kids and family. I understand 90 days plus initial sequestering is a long time. But it seems like somehow Kenney didn't understand this. He says he was a fan and has applied for years, but somehow the reality of actually getting on the show never occurred to him. He should have known what he was getting into and been ready to come and play the game. Alternatively, when he realized that he had screwed up by coming on, he should have just walked out the door rather than taking the weak middle ground of telling others he didn't want to be there, except when he sometimes did. There are other aspects that tell me Kenney didn't really understand what he was getting into, like wanting to maintain his character and not lie or scheme. People like that get under my skin no matter what show it is. But there's simply no excuse for not understanding what kind of game Big Brother is. It's one where my first rule for winning says to scheme and plot. But Kenney didn't want that, especially after the one person he chose to buddy up with got the boot first. If there had been any thought he might actually play the game, Matt's eviction squashed that in a hurry. After that, he occasionally talked to some people about his bad reads in the game, but otherwise was mostly a non-entity right up to the point he walked out the door. Kenney let his game get almost entirely overcome by his emotions, and what little of him was left was sent in the wrong direction by his incorrect reads and simply not wanting to actually play Big Brother. And that is why Kenney lost.
Among other reasons.
Yes.
There's so much.
Yeah.
But I think you summarized it as well as anyone could.
Thank you. All right. Well, before we continue into our spoiler-free predictions, want to mention how people can find us for spoilery things on social media. I, of course, am, you can find on Linktree at Linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE. Or more directly, I'm at David Bloomberg on Twitter and Blue Sky. On TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, I'm at David Bloomberg TV, as well as Threads. When I was on the Sunday recap with Rob, I mentioned that I do 3 or more. Yesterday, I did 5 different videos per day, and Rob about fell out of his chair. He was like, "You do how many?" But meanwhile, this is, it's Rob. He does that many podcasts. So, they're a combination of Big Brother, both the show and the live feeds, Claim to Fame, The Amazing Race Canada, and The Traders New Zealand, which just wrapped up. Um, so where can people find you on social media and everywhere else? I know that you're doing a whole bunch of stuff.
Did a few things. I stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Cory Wurtenberger. My full name, mostly Big Brother talk during Big Brother season. So watching the live feeds, doing whatnot. We patreon.com/AmeriCory. That is me and America's Patreon. We have a podcast. We just interviewed DJ Bowie Jane on there, which was a really good time. And, catch me on RHAP every Wednesday morning, live feed updates with Taryn. Seemingly next season we're gonna have Wurtenberger Wednesday, Quinn Fridays and Joseph Saturdays. So get there while it's special. But yeah, that's about what I've got going on.
All right. Okay, well then we can move into our predictions, and as I mentioned, they are spoiler free. So like I wrote these up before we know the outcome of the HOH comp. So people may be listening to this and saying, "Well, he's already wrong," or "How did he get so right?" I hope it's the latter, but yeah. Do you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
I can go first
Okay.
because we're assuming that Quinn is likely to use the deepfake
Mhm.
HOH. So whoever wins HOH will essentially have immunity, and that is about it. I think the correct prediction for who's going to get evicted has to fall on whoever's second most likely to be his target. Because clearly Tucker's going to be the main target, but he gets
Mhm.
to try to win immunity in HOH, assuming there's no backdoor. He'll get to play in veto and he'll get the AI arena. So I fully expect him to get one, if not more of those, because he might win the veto again and not use it. One, if not more, and whoever is second in line is likely to get the boot. My prediction right now, I'm feeling MJ.
Okay. Yeah, my prediction's very similar. Of course, it's a lot easier when you know who's going to be the HOH, which, you know, until the AI arena, we often knew who was going to be
Yeah.
HOH. But um, I think that his other nominees will be Angela, because she's an easy target and he's still pissed at her. And then I can see him putting up Rubina um, because of the pseudo showmance that she has going on with Tucker that TV viewers don't even know about yet. Although it did seem like Julie was sort of hinting at it a little bit at various times, which is surprising to me that Julie would even know something that wasn't on the show. But um, so yeah, I agree with you that he will probably manage to save himself. And then it's in my mind either Angela or Rubina. I think it's going to be Rubina. I think they're going to break up the duo because if they can't get Tucker, at least they can get someone who's supporting him.
Yeah, I think that is my second most likely option. For me,
Hmm.
it's just if Quinn and Cedric and these people know MJ, Rabina, and Angela, they're all targeting them.
Yeah,
MJ seems like the best competitor. But this house doesn't always operate off logic, so we'll see.
right, right. All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. There's a number of different patron only podcasts and other perks. When I was on the Sunday recap, they popped up a whole screen listing them. Of course, you get things like the slop, which America was on, plus other podcasts. I think as we're recording this, Rob and Taryn are doing the BBQ&A, which is for patrons. And so you could do that. Plus, you help support shows like ours and everything in the network. Again, at robhasawebsite.com/patron. Also, be sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP reality TV wrap ups by going to our YX Lost feed page or directly at robhasawebsite.com/big brother. You can subscribe according to whatever podcast service you use, and you get all the different content. If you subscribe to the wrap ups, it goes seamlessly into when we will be doing Survivor Why Blank Lost, which there will be a couple weeks of overlap, I believe, this year. With that, anything else that you want to talk about or say? I know I want to thank you for coming on and pushing off your final exam to come here
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah, look, I mean, anything to push off studying, David. So, honestly, I think my main thought is I've been watching so many of these podcasts for so long, and it's so interesting being on them because it doesn't. It's weird. It's kind of like watching myself on the show. Like I don't really see myself competing. It just feels like I'm watching Cory, this third person competing. So it's just a little bit surreal being here. Watching, you and Ovi talk about my game last year. You'd think I'd be a little bit more charitable. I'm glad to see that's not the case.
I mean, in all fairness, we did have a situation where it's hard to be charitable, I think.
Fair to
So,
say.
yeah. All right. Well, I want to, in addition to thanking you again for stepping in on pretty short notice and subbing for Ovi, also want to thank Scott St. Pierre and Jess Sterling and the whole RHAP and Reality TV Wrap Ups behind the scenes team. And yeah, we will be back. Ovi and I will be back next week. Cory, anytime you want to come by, just let me know. And yeah, we will see everyone on social media or next week. Bye, everyone.
This is why blank lost, and this is why blank lost. Oh, baby, this